Good evening, everybody. Hi. Welcome. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Ruby T, and I am the Curator of Museum Education here at PAM. Welcome to the Fredi, Schiff, Levin Lecture Series, which is graciously sponsored by the Levin family. Now in its 21st season, the lecture series honors Fredi Schiff Levin's legacy as a member of the Provincetown arts community by inviting artists, curators, authors, and scholars to speak at PAM. We are grateful to the Levin family for their continued support of this annual program. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we welcome Jane Paradise. Jane Paradise is an internationally recognized photographer and Provincetown resident who photographs the profound and intimate connections between people and their environments. Paradise is represented by Alden Gallery in Provincetown and Galatea Fine Art in Boston. She had solo exhibitions at the Cape Cod Museum of Art, the Griffin Museum of Photography in Winchester, Massachusetts, Art Space in Raleigh, North Carolina, Gallery Ava in Provincetown, Simmons College in Boston, and the Houston Center for Photography. Paradise has shown at the International Biennial of Fine Art and Documentary Photography and the Gallery of Photography in Ireland. Paradise has received honors in juried exhibitions including the New Britain Museum of American Art, Provincetown Art Association and Museum, the Center for Fine Art Photography, and the Worldwide Photo Biennial. Her work is in the permanent archives of the Southeast Museum of Photography and in collections across the United States and Europe. Paradise has curated many exhibitions at Galatea Fine Art in Boston and at PAM. In 2022, Schiffer published Dune Shacks of Provincetown, which features her photographs alongside quotes by those who have lived in and cared for the Dune Shacks. Her work is also published in the portfolio books Strength and Grace, Eulogy for Love and Summertime, a chronicle book. Elegy for Love and Summertime, a chronicle book. Please join me in welcoming Jane Paradise.
Hi. All right, so now can you all hear me? Great. Thank you, Pam, for having me, and thank you for the Levin family, and Tony is here, so thank you, Tony. That's a little bit of echo there. So Dune Shacks of Provincetown. This is my agenda. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll talk a little bit about how I work, a little bit, it's a little echo. Are you getting an echo? Yeah, so I'm getting an echo too somehow. So I'll do this. I'm going to talk about how I work, a little bit about my past projects, ongoing projects, present and future projects, and then about the Dune Shack book. It'll be roughly about 45 minutes. I can take questions as we go along, as well as I'll take questions at the end. So in general, I use multiple cameras. So everybody always asks me, what do I use? So I've been a Nikon person kind of forever, but lately, the past few years, I've used Fuji X100F. I never remember what it is. It actually, it's the one in the top corner, and it looks like a film camera. And when I use it on the street, people actually think I'm using a film camera, but it's not. I keep that little small one on the right in my car at all times. And the big Nikon I don't really use anymore. I don't know what's causing this echo. And I use now my iPhone a lot. I started using my iPhone when I was at the beginning of the pandemic when I started the project. My husband has Alzheimer's. I was using my camera, but then there was no way to get that on Instagram. So I was coming back using my computer, then posting it on Instagram, and it got really too complicated. This is how I work, which is actually our second bedroom. These are my work walls. I have a printer where I print everything myself up to 17 by 21. The board you see on the left is actually covering the bed. So that board comes up when we have company, and that's the bed that they sleep in. I take everything off of it, and when people leave, I put the board back down. So that's kind of what's happening. I use text and image a lot, even though I know the photos can stand alone. I feel sometimes for some projects, not all projects, that the words can create a narrative that really enhance the photos. And that's especially true. I have this Women in Aging series that I'll show part of you, where some of the photographs of the women have words associated with them. Some of the photographs don't have words associated with them, and that depended on the women I was photographing. Some of them were verbal, some of them were not particularly verbal. And you'll see it in my book with the dune checks also. I rarely use flash, and mostly that's because I don't really know how to use flash. So I never actually learned how to use flash. So that's why I don't use it. So I don't, like, you know, you see people with flash and all of that. I don't own any external flashes. So if my camera doesn't have a flash, I don't use it. Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt you,
No.
but we're having sound problems.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to switch to this mic.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
So
okay.
Can you hear it? I don't think so, because this is, okay, okay, okay.
Okay.
Try that.
Try this.
Thank you.
Okay. So, but is this on or off? It's off. I turned it off. Okay. So now can you hear me with this? Oh, much better. Great. Okay. So where was I? Oh, right. I rarely use flash because I don't know how to use flash. And I actually went to photography school for a year in London, and I think I missed or didn't understand how you use flash and all the technicalities of it. I rarely set up a scene. I started in photography actually doing a lot of street photography, and so I tend towards street photography even in my portraits. I use whatever camera's at hand, which is why I keep a camera in my glove compartment all the time. I usually have my iPhone with me, sometimes I don't. A lot of the dune check pictures you'll see, I'll go through what kind of cameras I've used there. I do take my bigger cameras with me there because I know I'm stable in one spot. So then I pick and choose which cameras I use in that case. I tend to work on long-term projects, so sometimes 10 years, sometimes 5 or 6 years. So rarely short-term, mostly long-term. A lot of my projects morph unexpectedly from one thing into another. And I collaborate with other artists, creative editors, other photographers, curators, different people. So the first project that I really worked on was Women in Aging. It's the first big project that I worked on with a lot of success. So I was in a 3-person exhibit at the Houston Center of Photography, and this was in 2009. So that was my first big project. And that was, a lot of people in town may know, was Norma Holt. So she is the woman who photographed the women on the pier. So this big photograph. So I photographed Norma. So, and that was really kind of serendipitous. I was taking a photography class at the Fine Arts Work Center, and it was a portrait photography class with Amy Arbus, and I didn't really have a model. And I walked into the Schoolhouse Gallery, and Norma was there because she was represented by Michael Carroll at the Schoolhouse Gallery, and I was telling him I'm taking this class. And she was sitting there and said, "Oh, I'll be your model." I said, "Oh, okay." So she was my model for that class. And so I became friends with her, and I started consistently photographing her. And as I photographed her, we became friends. And I said, "Oh, you know," along the way, I started writing down what she was saying to me and her different quotes. So then it became a collaborative project. I kept photographing her and writing down her quotes. And so that's how that project morphed into a project over the course of many years. And it became, when I was young, I was considered beautiful. Originally, the project was titled, When I Was Young, I Was Beautiful, because that was her original quote. And then she said, no, 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 you have to put considered in there because that was too arrogant. So that's how it became considered. She made me add that. So all the quotes that go with these photographs, they're her quotes, but she approved them. So there are no quotes in there that she did not approve that I could use, as well as with the photographs. So that started me on, okay, so this is a project. It got shown in Houston, and it was shown in Ireland as well. So then I started photographing my aunt. She died at like 104 and a half years old. And she was also pretty verbal. And she was pretty funny. So this was when she was 101. So she was like, have you ever seen these gorgeous legs? And I want to be a debutante. When I photographed Norma, I was photographing with my Nikon cameras because she, in essence, liked to be photographed, and she was a photographer herself, so she was pretty cool about this. And with Norma, it was pretty collaborative, because she would call me and say, Jane, I have to go to the doctor's. Wouldn't it be great if you photographed me at the doctor's? I need to go to Stop and Shop. Wouldn't that be great if you photographed me at Stop and Shop? Gee, wouldn't you like to go to the movies? So with Norma, it was this kind of two-way street about, you take me somewhere, and you can photograph me. All right, let's go swimming. Wouldn't that be nice? Pictures of me in the ocean. Okay, so Norma worked this collaborative photo project, okay? So I was using my Nikon with there. My aunt, on the other hand, she didn't mind being photographed, but she didn't like this big camera in front of her. So in that case, I used one of my smaller digital, but she was happy to be photographed, just not with a big photograph in front of her. So, and with her photographs, they're more intimate than they were with Norma. So there you have my aunt putting on her stocking, saying, have you ever seen such gorgeous legs? And I want to be a debutante. And then I photographed my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, who was completely, didn't care about anything at all. And all she used to say when we used to visit her, she died at 101. All she used to say was, why am I still here? Why am I still here, when we used to go visit her? And she would be sitting at the kitchen table right there, just sitting there, saying, why am I still here drinking instant coffee all day long? And so that set of photographs that you can see on the right, that was shown in Barcelona of just her. And that was it. Here's some and then I combined the whole project into one. And then I photographed my mother as well. There's a few photographs of her here. So as you can see, here's some exhibition views of the combination of Norma, my mother, my aunt, and my mother-in-law that we're seeing around. The other project I worked on was called the Blue Comma, which was photographs from Provincetown and the Province lands. And I'm still kind of in the back of my head thinking about doing this, which I may or may not do. So I actually, on the left, I'll show you on the next slide what I put together. I actually put together a quasi-book about photographs from Provincetown and the Province lands. And I put together in a spiral notebook so you could turn it like it was a real book. And on the right, like a PDF of all the photographs. So I did this really a while ago. Spent a lot of time sequencing this. I did it with the Webbs. A lot of people here, you may know Nancy Webb. Well, I did this with Alex Webb and Rebecca Webb. I did the sequencing into a book of these photographs of Provincetown and the Province lands. On the left is the old Herring Cove. On the right is Adams Pharmacy, the old Adams Pharmacy from God knows when. And then, so from that project, which I've may or may not have abandoned, morphed into my dune checkbook. So this is a project that I kind of put aside, but kind of just germinating in the back of my head, which turned into the dune checkbook. My husband has Alzheimer's, so a lot of people know that my husband has Alzheimer's. And so I started this project a few months after the pandemic started as a way of dealing with COVID, and also as a way of having a photography project. So I started photographing with a regular camera, which didn't work because I couldn't post them to Instagram. And this started really as an Instagram project. So this is what, so this was what, 2019, say June-ish. And so it took a couple months to get my footing on this. And what I did was our conversations. So I'd do a photograph, and then I would do Frank, me, Frank, me, Frank, me for conversations. And so in this case, I only put the quotes, his quotes. So all the Instagram postings are Frank, me, Frank, me. They're not all just of him. They're also photographs of Provincetown. So in this case, Frank, there's nobody here, what's wrong? He never really understood COVID at all. And then on the right, laying on our bed saying, I'm like, Frank, what are you doing? And I'm waiting for me. And then kind of in between, it's probably 2021, I'd say, this is in Suzanne's garden here in town. I'm tired, it's because I'm thinking. And on the right, he does not like to be left alone, especially without me. So I was going out to dinner, which I do, a fair amount, actually. And this was, when he, again, 2021-ish. If you go out to dinner alone, you'll be cold, alone, and die. He always had a great sense of humor. And so he was trying to, in essence, manipulate me into staying home, which I didn't. And then, sadly, this was just this month, on the left, I was downstairs watching TV, or whatever I was doing, and he's going, Jane, Jane, and so I go upstairs, and he's like, what is this? He had actually that's a motion detector light on the bottom of our wall outside. He had actually gotten out of bed, got the motion detector light, pulled it off the wall, gotten into bed, and was holding it. So he managed to, and then he's like, what is this? How did I get this? Who knows? And then on the right, it was the first time ever he didn't recognize his daughter. So his daughter came to visit him. So now he recognizes her name, and he lights up when you say, Elizabeth's coming to see you, but he looked her straight in the eye and says, I don't know you. And then she came back again a week later, and he still did not know her. But he recognizes her name. So when he hears her name, he lights up and everything. Maybe it'll come back, who knows? So you can see over the course of since the end of 1919 till now, what's happening. Okay, so now we have the dune checks. So I'm gonna give a little history of the dune checks as well, and to show you what the dune checks actually looked like. So in 1932, there was a lot of sand. If you look at the topography, when the Pilgrims came, they really devastated it. There was trees, and they cut down all the trees to build for firewood to build their houses and everything else. But if you notice the red line, to the left was always the Province Land State Park. So the state always owned to the left. That was always state land. And then the purple line you could see, that was the old Colony Railroad that came into town on the purple line. Yes, I don't have a pointer, but this purple line here is the old Colony Railroad, right there. Here is Snail Road, and you could see a Snail Road at that time went all the way out. Yeah. And this, the red line, that's Province lands State Park. Now, so that's what it looked like in 1932. And this, there's some books back there where I got these maps from Park Service maps. Then in 1961, you could see it's getting filled in now. And in 1961, over here, you've got Pilgrim Springs State Park, right? You still have the Province Land State Park, but in the middle, that used to be owned by a sand company that made sand for, it was a commercial sand developing company that actually exported sand. Yeah. But you can see it's much, much greener. The railroad is gone, of course, in 1961. You can see there were more shacks as well. And here's 2011, where you can see a lot more greenery. Snail Road does not go all the way across any longer. And this is today, which shacks, the map of the shacks that are included in what the Park Service is going to lease out. So everything in yellow, the shacks that are in yellow are the shacks that the Park Service is leasing out. The two shacks that the Park Service forgot about and are evicting are this shack, the Jeannie Sunel shack, that's the Del Dio shack, and the David and Connie Armstrong shack, the furthest shack on the east. Okay, so this is the dune shack. Well, it's kind of the history of Provincetown and a dune shack timeline. So rumor has it in 1003, Leif Erikson came and he described Cape Cod as long, sandy strands. 1602, Bartholomew Gosmald actually came here and encountered Native Americans in Provincetown Harbor. So the Pilgrims weren't the first to land here. They were really the first to come and colonize, even if it was only 90 days. They stripped the land and the forests, and the sand started moving into town. 1794 was the first beach hut or dune shack was built. By 1802, 6 more were constructed between Stouts Creek, that's the short road between Truro and Provincetown, by High Head. 1894, beach grass was planted. 1917 was really the first modern dune shack. There's ads from like the early 1900s. The Travelers Company had pictures. They took out full-page ads in magazines of people planting dune grass. And I forgot why Travelers took it out, but they must have had something to do with insurance reasons. Eugene O'Neill used the Peaked Hill Life Saving Station as a summer cottage. His father gave that cottage to him as a wedding gift. 1925 to 32, roughly, the Poet of the Dunes, Harry Kemp shack was built, and it was occupied, and he stayed there about 30 plus years. During the 1930s, that was really the time during which most of the shacks were built. There were about 13 of them that were built during that time. In 1934, Hazel Hawthorne, who had 3 or 4 shacks, she published a book called The Salt House, which the Provincetown Library has a copy of, and I've never been able to get a copy anywhere else. I mean, I keep checking eBay, I keep checking all the used bookstores, Abe's books, everything, and I cannot get a copy of it. But there is a copy in the Provincetown Library that you can copy yourself, so I made a copy of that book. And in my book, I quote Hazel Hawthorne from that book, The Salt House. And Cynthia Huntington, who spent, I think, a whole summer there, with her then husband, Bertha Yarborough. She wrote also a book called The Salt House about living in the dunes for a summer, which is a great book to read also. Arts Dunes Tour started in 1946. They've been around a long time. 1950, there's a photograph of Jack Kerouac riding in the Peaked Hill Dunes. So he wrote part of On the Road in a dune shack. And he wrote to the Park Service when the Park Service wanted to destroy all the shacks. He actually wrote a letter trying to save the dune shacks, and I quote him in my book as well. 1960, there were 28 shacks. Several burned, collapsed, or fell into the ocean. And the Park Service was responsible for some of those burnings. So there were people in town who had their shack. They were gone for the winter, came back for the summer, and it was Tabitha Beavers, her parents, came back, and their shack was gone, and the Park Service had burned it down. They burnt down, they destroyed Charlie Smith's shack as well. They did not want any dune shacks to be in the Park Service. So in 62, 61, Kennedy signed the Seashore Act. 62, the Great Beach Cottage Owners Association was established to try and protect the shacks as a way of life on the dunes. 66, the seashore was officially established. Oh, there we go. 84, 85, the Smith shack is destroyed by the National Park Service following his death. He was a birder, so he used to really keep track of the birds on the dunes. 85, the Peaked Hill Trust was established to protect the dune shacks. 88, the Cape Cod National Seashore Historian Report declared that there was no historic value to the shacks. In 89, the Massachusetts Historical Committee declared that there is historic value to the shacks. There's this really complicated, hard to follow relationship between it being historical, it not being historical, it being the dune shacks being a traditional cultural property and not being traditional cultural property. So in 89, it was the dune shacks of the Peaked Hill Bars Historic District, that's the official name, was determined to be eligible as a historic district by the keeper of the register. That began a fight of more than 25 years. Finally, the Cape Cod National Seashore agreed not to tear down any more shacks. 2003, Provincetown recommends that the district be defined as traditional cultural property. So in 2005, the Park Service commissions a cultural study, and they commissioned a cultural anthropologist, Robert Wolf, who came from the Midwest. So he had no ties to Provincetown, he had no ties to the East Coast. So you can draw your conclusion of what the Park Service was hoping. So he drew the conclusion that yes, this was traditional cultural property. Keeper of the National Register said, nope, did not meet that criteria, even after his report said yes, it did. So this kept going on and on. It's just an amazing, difficult to follow sequence of events and fighting. So finally in 2012, it was entered into the National Register. And at that time, it was entered into the National Register, Provincetown, Truro, and all the people who had dune shacks at the time came to an agreement how the dune shacks would be managed. And that has led to the fights we're having today. Because the Park Service is not necessarily following that 2012 agreement that was hammered out over months and months. Okay, so the major developments today regarding the dune shacks is this past May, they put out a national request for a proposal to lease 8 dune shacks for 10 years. So the rents range from $16,000 to $2,000 annually, but you can bid more. So that's what really sparked outrage from people was that, gee, we're putting rents on these places, but you can bid more. So in essence, to the highest bidder. All right, and then the shack dwellers claim the Park Service ignores their 2012 agreement. Then there were 2 eviction notices, one to artist Sal Del Dia and one to the Armstrong family. So Sal has used the Chanel shack since '53, but he was never on the lease. So that's the Park Service's reason for evicting him, because he was never on the lease. The Armstrong family has had a shack also since '52, roughly, but the head of the family had died, and their children was never on the lease, but the Park Service never, in essence, knew that the head of the family died. So they never kept track of who was dying and who was living, in essence. So they found out, oh, that person died. We forgot, or we didn't know. But the children were not on the lease. So that's the Park Service's reason for evicting Sal and the Armstrong people, is because Sal was not on the lease and the Armstrong children were not on the lease. Okay, so they're evicting them. But in the 2012 agreement, the Park Service agreed that no one would get evicted unless there was a new leasee, a new person ready to come into the shack. So they're violating that part of the agreement by evicting them. So now the Park Service has backed down on evicting both Sal and the Armstrongs and have offered them both 2-year agreements, which I believe, and I could be wrong at this point, both of them have rejected on principle. So I think that's where we stand now on those evictions. But the other leases, the other 8 shacks are out for bid, and the Park Service has received numerous proposals for the other dune shacks that are out for lease. And they were going to supposedly announce them soon, and they said they're not, because it's a more difficult process than they imagined, picking who's going to get the lease. All right. So some of the prominent dune dwellers. Eugenio O'Neill wrote Glass Menagerie there. Kerouac wrote part of On the Road there. Mary Oliver wrote many poems about the dunes. Harry Kemp was considered the poet of the dunes. Tennessee Williams, Thoreau, Annie Dillard, Michael Cunningham, Rothko, Pollock, Hans Hoffman, Ann Patchett, Charles Demuth, Marsden Hartley. I mean, there's a long history of artist writers that have been in the dunes. But there's a long history of families and fishermen also in the dunes. It's not just artists and writers. Okay, now we come to my book after you've got all that. Anyway, so this is the cover of the book, and it's the Tasha family shack, and it's originally the Harry Kemp shack. It was potentially built as a hen house as part of the Coast Guard station. That's the rumor. Is it true? Who knows? It was year-round. He lived in this shack year-round, 1932 until almost his death in 1960. So this is up for lease for $3,157 per year, or whatever you want to bid. It's since this photo was taken, it has been reshingled, but it is exactly the same size. I mean, that's the size. It's a dune shack that does not have an outhouse or a well. Most of the dune shacks have an outhouse and a well for water. This one does not. I think it uses the next door neighbors. So all the photos, again, like I said, I really work on long-term projects. The photos are from 2007 to 2021. They're all digital with all types of cameras. Lots of years of research, years. Research, reading, editing. So I've read all these books about Provincetown, about the dune shacks, and when I was reading, I would take notes and write down. I would highlight and then write down in a notebook all the quotes that I really liked. And this evolved from my other project, the Blue Comma, which was the photographs from Provincetown and the Province lands. I hired Joanne Dugan as an editor and creative director to work with me. She's here. She's happy to answer questions. Mark Adams, who a lot of you may know from Artists in Town, he did the end sleeves. I worked with him on that. Michael Mailer, who's a film producer who grew up in town. He's Norman Mailer's son. He wrote the foreword for the book. He went to Provincetown schools, and he used to go to the dunes all the time with his mother, Barbara Bentley. Mildred Champlin, who's a longtime dune dweller, they bought their shack in, I think, the 50s. Mission Bell, it's called. She wrote the closing essay. It's a fascinating essay. And so she's one of the families that have been here for a long time, and she has a lease that goes until her daughter dies. So every dune shack dweller negotiated a different lease with the Park Service. So some had it until they died, some had it until their children died. So she managed to negotiate till her daughter dies. So here's just curiosity. So there's Mark Adams' original drawing, and there it is in the book on the right. It's before and after end sleeves. So I'm just going to show you, for those of you who haven't seen the book, this is what the book looks like. It has a quote on the, for the most part, it has a quote on the left with a photograph on the right. And so this is a quote from Lawrence Schuster. He was I believe the only person who actually lived there year-round. So he lived in the dunes year-round. This is, the quotes, by the way, do not necessarily match the person. So the shack and the person are not necessarily the same. This is not a zoo. This is a private residence. I ask you to respect that. He used to get people, coming, a lot of the dune shack dwellers get people just coming up there randomly. And this is a quote from Mildred Champlin, who's been out there forever. And I love this quote because this really epitomizes how the people there in the dunes feel. I think of our community as a tapestry, with the families and individuals as the warp, some long threads stretching back over half a century, some a bit shorter, but just as important in the overall pattern. The weft is the associated way of life that we've had in common, raising our families, creating beautiful things, working hard at the tough problems we all face in this unique landscape. And the families are really adamant about being there and struggling and overcoming all the hardships that it takes to take care of these shacks. I mean, most of them have no running water. A couple of the shacks do have running water. But the storms rip off roofs, the mice inhabit the shacks during the winter. Most of the shacks you have to pump your own water and you're walking uphill. Water's heavy. Trying to think which shack. The shack that's on the left there, the shack on the left there is up for lease for $6,600 a year in the photo. This is a Hazel Hawthorne quote. This is one of the photographs I just happen to love a lot. So it went in the book like this, and you have to make compromises when you're doing a book. So that's the photo that's in the book. That's the original photo. So you can see it was cropped a bit on the left. This is a Hazel Hawthorne quote that I got from her original 1934 book. I looked across the rooms to the sea, which shows through the open north doors, for a piece of blue paper pasted down, and for further security, the sloping of the dune, where there's a storm and the door is closed, I feel dangerously shut in, and the house seems blinded. I rely a great deal on that door being open. I'm just, again, that's what the photo really, so, the photographs, which you can buy at Alden Gallery, the photographs are much brighter and sharper than they show in the book. Ann Patchett, I quote Ann Patchett, this is the only winter photograph in the book. So I sent her, but I love that. You bless the cold that has swept most tourists all the way down Route 6 and back across the Sagamore Bridge. She was so nice. So I sent her a copy of the book, and she was so nice. She sent me a postcard back. I was just like stunned that she took the time to actually respond, to tell me that she loved my book, and she ordered copies for her bookstore Parnassus, etc. So I thought that was really, really sweet of her to do that. I did a residency in the Dune Shacks for 2 weeks, and these were photographs I was sequencing for the other book, The Blue Comma, which I didn't do. So these are just some photographs. That's my husband, and that's the only photograph in the book of a person, and that's when he was able to play the violin. He used to play the violin. He was a concert master in high school. That's the interior of the cover of the book. That's the Harry Kemp shack. That's the interior of it. That's the footpath. That's kind of a landmark. When you see that tree, you know you're close to the ocean. That's the inside of the Ray Wells Dune Shack. Ray Wells and her husband owned the Muse restaurant. That's the inside of the Ray Wells shack when my husband and I were staying there. We put the towels up because the sun rises, and there's a bed there, and the light just comes in. There's Euphoria in the distance. Just John V.F. Martin is a longtime dune dweller. There's usually the water is very clear except for one shack where it's not. That's my husband pumping water, and you could see the hills that you have to climb with all that water. That's the Sal Del Dio dune shack that he's being evicted from. It was built 45, 46 on the side of the old Coast Guard station. And this shack is built on top of another shack that was covered. That's Mildred Champlin's shack. It was originally built in 36. Her husband found it in the early 50s and bought it from a townsperson. This is just my exhibit at Cape Cod Museum that just ended. Some press I had. That's it. So I'm happy to take questions. Yep. The question was, do I have a favorite dune shack? I actually do have a favorite dune shack, and it's the Ray Wells dune shack. It sits up high. It's probably the furthest from the ocean. It sits up high on a dune, and because it's the furthest from the ocean, it's also the furthest from the path for people walking by. It's also relatively large. It has a separate bedroom, a separate kitchen, and a really huge dining room and working area. So that's my favorite. Okay, so the question was there some parallel with the timing of all the hoopla that's going on with the dune shacks? And no, there wasn't. It turned out, so my book actually got caught up in all the COVID hoopla. So the book was supposed to come out, the book came out in December of 2022. It was actually supposed to come out in May. And then what happened was all that shipping problems in Los Angeles, that's what held up my book. Okay, so all the shipping problems held up my book. So the book was printed in India. And so it was held up by COVID. So the timing was just fluke. So it actually, I think, helped me being delayed.
I'm curious about blue comma. Where does that come from?
Okay, so the blue comma was trying to be creative in terms of looking at the shape of Provincetown. Looked like an end of the comma. So the question was, where did the blue comma come from? And the answer is the shape of Provincetown, trying to be creative. Yeah.
Maybe a silly question, but why did the Park Service want to get rid of the shacks?
The question was, why did the Park Service want to get rid of the shacks? I think that the Park Service should answer that, but I'll take a stab. I think it's work for them. I think it's just something that for them, they want a pristine environment, that they don't have to think about anything, they don't have to manage that. But I'm not sure, I think you'd need to ask them. Anybody else? Oh. What's my favorite project? You know, they're all kind of different. Do you know, I may have the elderly women, the dune shacks. My husband has Alzheimer's. I've got the Provincetown one, which I'm still kind of working on, I think, in the back of my head. I'm not sure. And I have, I also have, which I don't have up there, I actually have a street photography one that I have from around the world. We lived in London for 5 years and in Hong Kong for a year. So I've got a lot of street stuff going on. So I'm not sure. They're all different, and they afford me a different way of looking at things. Do you know? So I like the variety. So the question is, when people lease them, are there restrictions for what people can do? Yes, there are, and there are restrictions for the existing people there as well. Yes. Yes, Megan.
You had a mention of the Costco compact on your timeline, and they had a new founder and Seascape. Do you know how that was established or how they acquired their section? I'm really authorized with
So the question was, the Provincetown Community Compact was established, and that includes the Peaked Hill was established, and they have dune shacks. And how did they acquire those dune shacks? I'm not exactly sure. I do know how the Peaked Hill acquired some of their dune shacks. I don't exactly know how the Provincetown Community Compact acquired theirs. So when Boris Margot died, the superintendent at the time, in essence, gave a special, and so I know how they acquired that. The Peaked Hill Trust was managing Zara's shack, and so somehow when she died or whatever, the Seashore said, okay, you could keep doing that. But I don't know how. I don't know, there's a lot of complications, but I think the Seashore superintendents had a lot of leeway to do what they wanted. Anybody else? Yep.
I think that
Here, why don't you, Irene, yes, there you go.
Peaked Hill, they like the Park Service because they made it available to everyone, and that's the bottom line, as well as Peg Shack that isn't part of it but helped us a lot.
I think what Irene was saying was that the Park Service liked Peaked Hill because it made they made the shacks available to a lot of people and through the lottery system. Anybody else? I think we're done. Oh, you have a question. Wait. Ruby has a question, sorry.
My question is, do you have any ideas or desires around how you would like to either yourself document or maybe see another photographer document this sort of like contentious evolution of the dune shacks as it's happening now and will be in the near future?
I'm not sure. I would like to see, certainly the park make public who gets the leases. And what I would like to see is somebody photograph that transition taking place from one family who has the dune shacks now. If they do not get the lease from, if they're not the lease person, if they don't get the lease from the Park Service, I'd like to see that transition take place. And I'd like to photograph how they're changing the dune shacks from how they are now. So yes, I'd like to see somebody do that. Because I think that would be an interesting project to see that transition take place. And to document, how the shacks are now and what they're going to look like in 5 years or 10 years. Part of the 2012 agreement that the Park Service made, that they're ignoring parts of, if it was greater than a 10-year lease in this 2012 agreement, they would have had to take into consideration the people who are in there now. Less than 10 years, they don't have to do that. So they made it 10 years and less agreement. Greater than 10 years, there's provisions for having familiarity with the dunes, having familiarity with the history of the dunes, and all of these other provisions. So if the lease was for 11 years, it would have changed things. Or maybe not, since they're ignoring parts of the other agreement, I don't know. Yep. How many dune, the question was how many dune shacks are there and how many are being leased? There's 8 being leased, 2 that are being evicted, which will eventually go to lease. And there's 17 or 19 total. There's 1 dune shack that is privately owned that they cannot touch. The Malakote family owns their dune shack. So I'm not sure exactly how that happened. What's interesting, I think, is all of these dune shacks that are being leased, well, all the dune shacks, they actually have boundaries. Some are an acre, some are 2 acres. They actually have physical boundaries. They're have physical boundaries. I mean, and those boundaries are laid out. So they're not just there with no boundaries. They have physical boundaries. And they've also been paying taxes to the towns of Provincetown and Truro. So they've been paying taxes. So I'm not quite sure how that works, because they've been paying taxes. Yes. Oh, I don't know. Oh. Yeah, so what she's saying is people are really being kicked off a cliff because everybody whose shacks are being leased are being asked to vacate it. And that includes all their possessions and everything, right? And people went through this back in 1986 as well, trying to preserve the shacks, and it's going through it again, but who knows what the outcome's going to be. But they are going to lease them I mean, I can't see them backing off of the leases, the RFPs that they already put out. And you lose history. I mean, well, that's why I think it's important, like Ruby's question, that someone should be documenting what is or what isn't going to happen. I actually went on a tour of when the Park Service offered tours for people who wanted to lease the shacks. So I actually went on a tour. There was not one person on that tour who'd been to a dune shack before. There was a person from Connecticut who had never been to Cape Cod, who, okay, never been to Cape Cod, had no idea about the dune shacks at all. There were a couple people from Nantucket who were taking pictures underneath and this and that, but I mean, had never been to Cape Cod before, had no clue, no history, had no idea about anything. It was like shocking. Who owns the dirt under it? The National Seashore. National Seashore. Yep. Yep. Oh, the question was who owns the dirt under it? National Seashore. Yeah. But people pay taxes. I mean, it's not. It's a really confusing and complicated history.
Thank you, Jane. That was really fabulous. And thank you, everybody, for being here.